was sort of what was going on in the back of my office because I had moved my desk so I could face the window. But then also this was the only room in the house that we hadn't renovated when we did a huge renovation. And so the ceiling had never been painted and the walls were in bad shape. And so it was just time to do it. So I got up at 8 o'clock, started at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, and I worked right through till 5, and I got the whole thing patched, painted.
Nice.
Anyway,
I like painting. It's fun. It's like immediate sense of accomplishment in life. Like mowing your lawn.
Painting. It's the moving of the furniture and the cleaning that goes with it.
Right. There's some parts that aren't as fun. Yeah. But the actual like seeing something that was one color and now it's a new color and it's fresh and fun. I kind of like it.
Today's guest is Marie Wiese, founder of Marketing Copilot and a leader in the industry in AI and women in tech. And we're excited to talk to her about women in tech right now.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Marie Wiese, and I am the CEO of a company called Marketing Copilot, and we are a strategic AI marketing firm that helps primarily Microsoft partners in the channel with their go-to-market strategies and creating demand for their businesses. I've been in the tech sector for over 30 years, and I'm currently an MVP, a Microsoft MVP in AI, and we do a lot of work in the area of responsible AI, a job I take very seriously. What led me to start the podcast in 2018 about advancing women in tech and sharing the stories of women in tech with the hope that it would lead to other women either early on or later on in their careers want to consider a career in tech. The reason I started it is because I had sat on the board of tech associations and been the only woman in the room, and sat on a global tech association board that talked about advancing women in tech, but was kind of paying lip service to it. You know how people accuse companies, big corporate companies, of either greenwashing or using a particularly popular theme like the environment or women in business and using it as a PR campaign, but not really doing anything and not really putting very much behind it?
You bet.
I was part of tech associations that were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm tired of this. We can do better. I can do better. And that's when I started the podcast. And I've recorded over 100 episodes. I've had over 120 women as guests. We have reached people in 55 countries with a multitude of downloads per episode, and used to distribute, we're not doing it anymore, but we used to distribute through a channel association. And so it reached another 30,000 people. So it just, there were moments when I wanted to give up because I did all of that out of my own pocket. I paid for it all myself. I continue to pay for it myself. We had a sponsorship a while back with Intel for a very brief period of time, but that, you know, it's something that's really needed, really necessary. And I know lots of people, when they show up at events and they see us speak and I put a panel together and whatever, they're all on side. We're just not moving the needle as fast as I would like. And that's my hope for 2025, is that the needle moves a little bit faster than it has in the past.
At Summit, I was there at the Women in Tech luncheon. I think I was one of 3, maybe 4 guys in the room out of hundreds. I made sure, by the way, I didn't want to impose. So I made sure that I was welcome. I didn't want to, again, impose it's something that was, maybe, sacred or personal space for women in tech to gather. There. So I was happy that when I looked, I was like, oh, cool, I can go, because I want to hear and be a part of this and help to continue to push this along. And you mentioned redefining women in tech, the terminology, and that I didn't have a chance to talk to you about it, but our table in particular was definitely perplexed by that. So maybe if you don't mind talking a little bit.
Rebranding.
Rebranding. Yeah. Thank you. Rebranding.
Rebranding tech.
Yeah. Rebranding women in tech.
Rebranding tech. And I think the conversations I had over the last year was specifically around defining what it means to be in tech. Because again, not only was I a woman in tech, but I was a woman in tech in sales and marketing and therefore not considered in tech.
Right.
Oh, she's in sales or she's in marketing. So she's not in tech. And yet I have worked for technology companies, software companies. The only thing I've ever marketed is technology. The only thing I've ever sold is technology. Since 1998.
Yeah.
1998. Actually, and even before that, sorry, that's not true, since 1994. Because I worked for a bank in the tech department selling tech that the bank was trying to sell outside the bank.
Yeah.
So I've worked in tech for a long time. And even then, when you were told, well, you're in sales and marketing, so you're not really in tech. I think that's part of the problem. It doesn't mean that you're just sitting coding something. That's the only way you can be defined is in the tech sector.
Yeah, you're a coder, you're a network admin, you're a whatever. Yeah.
I think it's the role you play in bringing technology to the world and the world that uses the technology. The role you play in any of that means you're in the tech sector.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be in tech? And what do the jobs look like? So we discussed rebranding what it means to be in tech because we don't think the definition that young women in particular are seeing is particularly interesting. And as I mentioned, we've come through a bit of a hangover of a lot of very wealthy men billionaires who drove the tech sector for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
Being the vision and the thought that, well, that's what it means to be in tech, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that person.
And then you see women, the women in tech, you do see people who are leading Google or Dell or HP or whatever. They're so high level. I was going to ask you, it's just, you see that and it's like that's kind of hard to grasp. Just like any project, you start small. So it's kind of hard to grasp it. Like, oh, cool. I can be a CEO of a large tech company too. I see a woman doing it. And that's kind of the thought around it is like, you want to see your peers doing this. So like, to your point, how do you start seeing your peers in a way that makes sense to you? It's like, oh, well, I didn't realize I could get into tech, maybe make more money, maybe have a better job, more job opportunities by being a sales and marketing professional in the tech industry. And I'm now a person in tech. And that's a jump that, like you said, maybe people aren't making naturally.
Well, what's really interesting is if you talk to any young person today, and this is why at the luncheon we challenged people to go out and have conversations with three young women in their lives to ask them their impression of the tech sector and if they'd ever consider it as a career. When you talk to any young person, and then all of the women that I've had on the podcast, I've asked, how did you get into tech? What led you here? And what you'll hear over and over and over again, and nine times out of 10, when you ask somebody, the first thing they say is, my mother did this, or my father did this, or I had an uncle who was really influential in my life, and he suggested I do this. When you think about it, in some way, shape, or form, we all go into the family business. And if your parents are doctors, you consider being a doctor. If your parents are accountants, you consider being an accountant. If your parents are in tech, you consider going into tech. So you can see how cyclically what ends up happening then if we don't have women in tech. And we're not seeing those roles because we see more women being teachers or nurses or caregivers or in the health profession. We don't see them in business. So when we don't see them there, and then they're also not influencing their own children, then you're just going to keep perpetuating it over and over and over again that naturally women won't gravitate to the tech sector.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad was a teacher, a high school teacher, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. So there's no reason I should be in tech.
Just called you out though.
But I found my way into financial services marketing early on in my career, and then found my way into a bank, and then into my first entrepreneurial tech firm, software firm that was ramping up in the late 90s, and got in it and realized, oh my God, there's so much opportunity. There's so much here. You could be a really great project manager. You could be a product development person who leads the product from the business side. You could be, a lot of women get into it through customer service. They just like to solve problems and help people. Like, there's so many ways to cycle into this. So I just think we need to do a better job of explaining why it is a great career and why it's a great industry to be part of. Yeah. And what I am really happy about is that at this particular event that you mentioned, it was the first time in a long time that I had seen that many women there and that many diverse groups of women.
Good.
And so, I mean, you have to agree, like, that event was a sellout, and I was overwhelmed by the response and the number of people who showed up to hear the conversation. And it finally felt to me like we were heading in the right direction.
You mentioned the plateau at 22% for women in tech. Do you think there's a fatigue in that? Is that kind of what, like you said, is it hit, hey, we did some hard work, we got to a certain level and now we're stuck? Is that a fatigue point, or is it truly?
No, because it's been hovering between 21 and 24% for over 20 years.
Okay.
And I think it has to do with, I really honestly believe it has to do with the image that's been created around tech.
Yep.
And the image that says, if you're not trying to be a young, hot billionaire in the tech sector, well, then you don't belong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's...
And if you listen to Malcolm Gladwell will argue that the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates of the world are unicorns. You're not going to see a lot of them. So why are we focused on them? As a while ago, we were very much focused on them as being the tech sector.
Yeah.
And the poster boys for the tech sector. Now it's your social media guys, your Amazon people, your Google people. They're the poster childs for the tech sector. And I'm sorry, it just doesn't look appealing.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think, and this is interesting. Like, I'm trying to think of a female equivalent.
There isn't one.
I can think of females who have run those businesses, like, the CEO, the CFO of those large corporations like Google or Facebook or Apple. But I'm trying to think of a person like that, like probably the gal from Thanos. Is that not right? Thanos is I'm probably not saying that right. The gal who just got convicted of fraud, but basically that was a female who was kind of leading a charge in a tech sector that was kind of an outward face of, like, just, kind of really, leading a strong charge.
So we've talked about this a lot on the Producers Corner. We do a Producers Corner once a month on Women Talk Tech. And we talked about this in December, about when we did the year wrap up, like where are we really at? And even at the end of 2024, they published the top hottest tech execs to watch in 2025, and there wasn't one woman on the list. They profiled 13 CEOs of what they called the hot tech, not startups, but the hot tech companies, and there wasn't one single woman on the list.
Interesting. But they're out there, right? You started a company. Women are out there they're out there starting tech companies. But to your point, they're not maybe the sexiest tech companies. They're not they don't have this outward face of
I think
attention.
They're solving real problems.
They're solving real problems.
Real tech stuff, and it doesn't necessarily scale and become gazillionaires the way certain people did. And I also believe that in some cases, women just aren't willing to do what is necessary to get to the next level. Their attitude is, I'm quite happy where I am. I've accomplished what I want to accomplish. I can now take this, sell it, do whatever. Now I can go move on and go do something else.
Yeah.
I know a lot of women feel that way, the ones who leave the tech sector. We've had a lot of conversations with that over the years on the podcast about when
Yeah.
women leave, why they leave, and what they go do instead. And it's pretty interesting.
It's, again, another reason why I wanted to to continue adding another voice, or allowing space for another voice, really. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to do a ton of talking, but I want to uplift, to your point, all these folks. Like, we know a ton in the industry because we're paying attention to it. So if I were to say, like, man, I see a lot of women in tech, but I know I'm in a vacuum of opportunity to meet and talk to folks like Shannon Mullins or Mary Myers, or I could go on and on, the smart women that I know who are running their own businesses and doing exactly what you said, but they're not out there, in that next tier, that highest tier of spotlight, which could be the tier that, that people need exposure to. Yep. And again, something that's always been top of mind for me. I've shared stories with you in the past about hiring and different things that I've encountered across, and to your point, when I emboldened myself to speak up, that was powerful. Just, as a point of note for any man out there who's, in a room where you hear or see something, it just doesn't quite seem right. It just seems off.
Right.
And I'm sure I let more pass than I should have, going back and back into that career we talked about. But at some point I felt like I just can't let this pass anymore. I've got to say something, and I've got to speak up and make a different choice, or, change the narrative in the room, because it is important. It just doesn't feel right. And it goes back to, I think, some of that evolved thinking you were talking about before, is like, as a 20-year-old, I hadn't quite evolved. As a 23-year-old, I hadn't yet evolved. I hadn't been in the corporate world. I didn't go to college right out of high school. I was a good employee wherever I was, but I didn't have a path to, like, oh, I'm going to be a tech person. I just kind of, oh, this job, cool.
Right.
I'm going to do really good at it, and I'll see where it goes. And then, okay, and now I'm
Right.
kind of done here. I'm going to move to the next job. So you learn and you evolve your thinking.
Yeah. I just back to that comment you made. I was listening to another podcast. I listen to a lot of podcasts because I love to see what the format is and how people do them. And it was a group of these British actresses sitting around talking, and one of them was Maggie Smith. And they said, if you could go back in time and tell your 20-something self something, what would you tell yourself? And she kind of struggled with that. And then she said, I think the thing that I would tell myself is, if it doesn't feel right, don't.
Yeah.
She left it at that. If it doesn't feel right, don't. If I could go back in time and tell my 20-year-old self something, I would go back and tell my 20-year-old self, get into tech sooner.
100%. Yeah.
Don't be a follower, be a leader in tech, and get out there, and don't be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be a great career, and it will greatly pay off for those people who embrace it.
Yep. And you remind me too of, and I'm going to forget who said this, but it was a female, and it was something along the lines of, it might've been Maya Angelou. When you find out something's wrong, fix it and move forward. So it's the same thing. When you feel like something's wrong, right there, it's okay. You made choices before, but now fix it and move forward. Make changes for the better. When you know something isn't right, and if those are good things to think about. Point about kind of the lip service. I mean, look at all the DEI policies that went into place starting about just before pandemic, and now they're being rolled back. It was kind of like, oh, we've got to do this because people are freaking out, and if we don't do this, and then okay, now everybody's cool again. We don't have to do it anymore because now it's a different tie. It's like instead of taking it as a real need of like, and there's a good balance in my opinion in bringing it along and adapting it for the times. But when you've got a group of people, whether they're women or other diverse folks, when you've had some type of oppression in life, like you said, job, you can't get a loan 20 years ago. That's insane. Pay disparity, that it doesn't, turn overnight. Like, I feel like that's the other thing. It's like, oh, well, we made some policies today. Everything's cool now. Right. It ain't
Yeah.
cool
And
yet.
and I have to just clarify something. I wasn't even looking for money 20 years ago. I just wanted to open up a business account and not do
Yeah.
everything out of my personal account. I started
Good,
my company
good
on my
point.
own personal credit cards.
Yeah.
So I
That's a
wasn't
good
even
point.
looking for
Yeah.
money. It
Mm.
was just let me open this. And they said, your
Yeah.
husband has to come in and co-sign it.
Right.
And it
You've got
was
to come
like,
get permission from your husband. I mean, that's just absurd to me, to
I
think about,
know.
having to deal with.
Recently I heard the actress Emily Blunt on a podcast talking about quote unquote female producers. And there is a real problem in the entertainment industry as well as far as gender parity. And she
Mhm.
said, I'm just so frustrated when people say, well, it was good for a female producer, or we have to have a caveat that these are female producers. Why can't they just be producers and people
Yeah.
have just as much opportunity regardless of gender?
Yeah.
And she's absolutely right. But that's not the reality. There's
It's,
certain people controlling things right now, and they don't want to let go of the control. They
yeah.
don't want to let other people into the sandbox. So when you asked the question originally, what can men do and what can people do in this situation, is even if you think somebody might be a competitor, or it doesn't really matter, open up the sandbox and let other people come and play in it,
Yeah.
because you're going to be shocked at how much further you get when you don't hold true to the idea that because you're a certain gender, you're better than someone else, or a race, you're better than someone else. When you accept that we have something to learn from everyone, and we approach the world with an open mindset, not a fixed mindset,
Mm.
that's when things get really good. That's when things get better. And every single team I've worked on in the tech sector has, when teams have worked really well, they've had an open mindset.
Hmm.
And that's where you get a lot done. People like working on that team, people like being part of the solution. Isn't that all what we aspire to?
100%. Yeah. I mean, it just, like you said, being able to feel like your voice is heard, regardless of who you are in a room, it's an awesome feeling. There's nothing like it. So, yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a good thing to attain to, is just kind of just an involved mindset of allowing folks to have a seat at the table at the end of the day, whoever they are, and wherever they are, in whatever
That's
capacity
exactly
you can
right.
get them there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Um, Anything else that's top of mind for you on this subject? I know everything. There's so many, facets, and we could go on for hours, I'm sure. But just want to give you a
Well, I
chance
mean,
to anything that you feel like, hey, I don't want to leave until I say this one thing, because it's super top of mind, or
right.
so important that we want to just keep it out there.
So, the one thing I would say to listeners, and if you're working in a company that hasn't considered, promoting women in tech and raising the profile of women in tech, consider doing it in 2025. And there's lots of great organizations like the one you represent, Bobby, and our podcast, Women Talk Tech, and other great events that I know about, where you can show up, you can support, you can sponsor, you can do a whole bunch of things. I think for everyone's sake, so that there's more diversity at the table around the technology that's getting built for the world we live in, we need more women at the table. And so show up in 2025 and figure out how to help raise that message.
If we, like you said, we're in the 20 percentile. Keep, even if it's 1%, at a time, we need to keep clipping away. That's the rule. Golden rule is to keep, I have this written on my whiteboard, 1%. That's all. That's what I attain to. If I can just get another 1%, another 1%, that's my focus. If I
You know what's
can.
really crazy? You know what's super crazy? Numbers of women in tech were growing really fast in the 70s.
Mm,
And then in the 80s, it all slid back.
yeah.
And I don't know what happened. I need to study this topic a little bit more, but we were up at around 21, 22%, and then it slid back to like 17%. And now it's just been a slow, gradual climb ever since. The 80s were not good to women in the tech sector.
My kind of corporate career back in the, late 80s, when it was definitely, male dominated, and just wasn't any talk about women in tech that I heard of. So kind of saw some side of it and kind of, developed my opinion on this as I grew up through the through the corporate world. So, I just wanted to take this on as a topic and keep propelling it forward in whatever way possible. So first off, I'd love to hear from you on how I can, continue, what's the best way for me to continue to do that. As a male, I'm also concerned about, I don't want to be a dominant voice. I don't want to be, too strong, but I want to be an advocate. So I'm trying to learn that path as well.
I understand that's a hard road to walk. I appreciate that that's a hard road to walk. But what I would say is, if you really go look at the definition, in the dictionary or even on ChatGPT about what it means to be a feminist and what it means to respect the feminine equality position, it's just really frustrating, even at a societal level, that women are still not held in regard. We're still considered the support system to men, the ones who have the babies so that more people can be in the world. It's very much a patriarchal society that we're living in. And in the business world, it is very much a world that was structured by men for men. And so the thing that men can do that is the biggest help, especially as they're looking at their wives and daughters and whoever's coming into the workforce, is to advocate for those things that are not the status quo. So when you see a company who doesn't have a good maternity leave policy on their website, which is a very big deal here in Canada, and I appreciate women only get 6 weeks off in the US, and that's wild in my opinion. But to continue to, and just recently in Canada, we had a huge strike with our Canada Post. And it happened right before the holidays, which is obviously what the union wanted to happen to cause the most disruption possible. And while I was railing against it, a very young woman, millennial woman, said to me, "Do you know it's Canada Post who lobbied for maternity leave in this country? Do you know they're the ones that have provided the reason that you or your spouse can take a year off when you have a baby to recover physically, to recover emotionally and mentally, and figure out the best way forward when you're raising a child and working at the same time?"
Yeah.
And I said, I forgot. And thank you for reminding me that there's lots of people who put their hand up and actively said, this workforce isn't conducive to women. And so I think it's really important for everyone, men, women, everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, it doesn't matter, to remember that there's fundamental things that we have to consider in the workforce. And the reason that is doubly, triply, quadruply important in the tech sector is because we're coming through a culture in the tech sector of guys in hoodies coding and, up all night figuring out how to code a product and thinking that that's a great environment to be in, and it's not. So young women look at it and say, I don't want that.
Right.
And yet so many of the jobs in the world rely on technology in some way, shape, or form. Producing technology continues to be very lucrative and a big part of how society's moving forward. Therefore, from an economic perspective and where we have to balance things economically, it just is such common sense that more than 22% of the tech sector should be women when we make up 51% of the population.
Yeah.
And so it baffles me on two fronts: why young women don't want to come into the sector, why women come into the sector and leave, and then overall from a workplace perspective, why we're still only at 20% in leadership roles. And I really, truly believe, after studying this issue for years and being in the tech sector myself for over 30 years, that it's because we've built a structure that's conducive to men. We haven't built a structure that just feels right to women. And therefore, when it doesn't feel right, we opt out.
Yeah.
And I think that has to change, and it should change a lot faster than it has been, because at the rate we're going, I won't see it in my lifetime. I don't even think your daughters will see it in their lifetime.
Yeah, this kind of change is tough to envision. Like even racism, discrimination. I mean, we're only decades away from the 60s when people were being persecuted at a really gross level in the United States. And people think that it's gone, that it's somehow been completely, washed away. And I can't believe that as a person of logic to say, hey, it's only been a few decades. Most of those people are still living. So most of that hate is still, exists somewhere. And so, it's generational that it's not going to be my generation or even the next, like you said, that's going to be seeing transformative change maybe.
And even something as simple as, I started my business in 2003, and I was in a really unique situation where in 2003, I had 3 children, had been recovering from some pretty traumatic health problems. And so my husband and I decided that he decided he was going to stay home with the kids for a while. And so I was the primary breadwinner in the family. And when I started my business in 2004 and went to the bank in 2004, 20 years ago, that's only 20 years ago, I got told by the bank manager when I was asking to open up a business loan, the bank manager said, you're going to have your husband come in and co-sign. And that was only 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And a man would not have been asked the same thing if he was starting a business. They would have said, hey, good luck, get at it.
Yeah.
But a woman who was the primary breadwinner in a family with 3 kids, because I had to disclose at the time, bank asked me to disclose how many kids I was supporting at home and whether I had a spouse. And so that's only 20 years ago. So it doesn't surprise me that change has been slow. It doesn't make it right. But it means that we need more voices more than ever to talk about some of the gender parity issues that we're still trying to battle. So you mentioned things like racism in the 60s. And you're absolutely right. And the 60s wasn't that long ago either. We're still recovering from a whole lot of stuff where, unfortunately, certain people in society think that there is one group who are better than another. And so they hold back the other group, however that's defined. And that's what kind of breaks my heart, because I think we're better than that. I think we could do better.
Thank you, Marie. I appreciate it. And you're also a Canadian, by the way. And I made my first trip to Toronto. It was last year. I can't believe that was already last year.
November.
Yeah, that's silly to me.
To see you.
Yeah, when it was a great event. It was great to see you. And I look forward to seeing you soon somewhere around the community.
Well, we're already in planning for the Toronto event in June, so hopefully you'll be there for that too. Because June is way nicer in Toronto than November.
And I want to be at every event, so I'm fighting my best to be there.
As you should be, Bobby. As you should be.
Well, thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, Marie. I appreciate it.
Same to you.
Gosh, I've been thinking about what I would tell my 20-year-old self. And I do like, just getting into tech. I think, I don't know. I think I'm going to give that some thought. Maybe I'll have something by the end of this to grab onto, because there's so much I would go back. It's a great philosophical question to think about, like, because there's so much you could do and tell yourself, and,
right.
But
and don't say things like, I wish I'd bought Microsoft stock sooner. Or,
right, that's the natural thing, like Apple.
Apple stock. That doesn't count.
It doesn't. No, that's the Marty McFly conundrum. You can't go in time, go forward in time and buy the almanac and come back and try to bet on the games.
No, you need to come up with something profound.
It's got to be profound.
About what you would have told yourself.